Hello, my name is Jeff Farbman from the Wallace Center at Winrock International. Welcome to Roadmap for City Food Sector Innovation and Investment webinar. I'd like to just begin the webinar with a very brief technical introduction to help you get the most out of the webinar today. Your webinar screen looks something like this. Slide presentation on the left and the control panel on the right. Note that sometimes the software does collapse the control panel to make it take less of your screen. So if that happens, just hit that little orange arrow, look on the extreme right side of your screen to find the collapsed control panel. We do suggest that you keep it visible, the control panel visible, so you can see any written answers to questions and submit questions of your own. You are muted. To keep it visible, select the View menu and deselect Auto Hide Control Panel. Over in the control panel is that questions box. Please use this to type your questions for the presenters. We will ask as many questions of our presenters as possible in the question and answer section, but I do encourage you to get your questions in whenever they occur to you. The webinar will be archived on the ngfn.org website. You can go to ngfn.org/cityfoodsector, and we'll give you that information at the bottom of the webinar as well. So let me hand the presentation over to Gail Prest, the Sustainability Director for the City of Minneapolis, to start the presentation off today.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. This is going to be an exciting hour and a half, and we're going to move you through it pretty quickly. Jeff, I am not moving these. There we go. So here's the kind of our webinar outline for today. I'll go over it in a bit more in a bit. And what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about how this project started. So this project is funded by the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, in which I am a member. In 2013, we had USDN members in over 120 cities and counties in the US and Canada. And basically, we're a peer-to-peer network where we're actively engaged with each other to share ideas and collaborate on solutions. We're very lucky that this was part of what's called an innovation grant. And our major funders for the innovation grants are the Summit Foundation, the JPB Foundation, and the Surdna Foundation. Just a quick overview of what the seminar is going to look like. We're going to go through some of the major findings in the Lit Review. We'll do case studies. Somebody else will be talking about some of the tools and the action plan framework that we've developed. And we're going to be leaving about 30 minutes for questions and discussion, because I think there's a lot of information here. You're probably going to want to go online and look at the report and really understand it more, but this is a good way to help you understand what's going to be happening. As was mentioned earlier, please don't forget to write questions, and we'll do the question and discussion at the end. So real quickly now, I'd like to introduce Diana Sokolov with the City of San Francisco. Take it away, Diana.
Hi, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Diana Sokolov, and I am the Food Systems Policy Manager for the San Francisco Planning Department. And I feel really privileged to have had this opportunity to work and collaborate with such a competent and dynamic team. And I did want to introduce them to you. The partner cities for the project, who are shown on the left-hand side of the screen, participated on my steering committee. And as a committee, we worked extremely closely with our consultants, the Wallace Center at Winrock International and Changing Tastes. So you can see here the cycle of benefits and impacts related to local food system investment, starting in the orange circle on the left. This kind of investment really supports local employment and incomes in cities with multiple social and economic and environmental effects. For instance, just to get right into it, farmers markets have really demonstrated their ability to stimulate urban and rural economies and provide communities with access to healthy, fresh food. So there is this cycle of benefits that occur when you invest in your local food system. The reason why the City of San Francisco pursued this project at the outset was to provide cities with a better understanding of the emerging investment opportunities by identifying current trends and featuring examples of high-impact investment opportunities, and therefore our desire was to provide a roadmap for cities to strengthen their food systems through strategic investment decisions. We wanted to start with a case study approach by looking at what folks are doing right and why are they doing it. We also wanted to really drill into existing data on local multipliers to try to target the right leverage points. We figured if we could do that, we could help cities achieve greater and, of course, faster impacts. And this extensive review provided the foundation for a robust framework for evaluating an urban food system to help cities find those leverage points and evaluate investment opportunities. This graphic illustrates how important the food sector is to our economy. The literature review that was conducted by the Wallace Center and Changing Tastes found that the food sector has been and will be one of the largest sectors of the economy and a major source of job creation. These are the key findings of the literature review and best practice analysis. The information on this slide really represents the key findings from the literature review, and the first bullet shouldn't be any surprise to anyone. Demand for local food is increasing, businesses are taking notice. However, you might be surprised to hear under the second bullet that over 1/3 of large food companies plan to increase their spending on acquisitions of smaller local food businesses. And simultaneously, it appears as though venture capitalists are beginning to understand changing consumer demands and are definitely backing the launch of new small-scale, local, and sustainable food businesses. And with regard to the third bullet, we're going to talk about this a little later on, but I'll just introduce to you that the research shows that if there is a fairly significant trade-off between job type and expected wages. In other words, most of the job growth is going to be in processing, food service, and retail, but not all of these jobs are going to pay the same kind of wages. Production and processing do garner the highest wages and also have the highest multiplier effects, whereas food service has some of the lowest wages, but make up a large portion of the food economy. So cities really need to decide how they're going to invest based on their overall goals for their food system. So these are the high-impact innovations, the ones that really bubbled up to the top after conducting this extensive research. High tech, on the upper left-hand side, are food business technology companies, range in size from 7 to 70 employees, but are definitely a source of high skill, high paying jobs. They're quickly expanding, and they are definitely an important intermediary between meeting fast-growing demand and shaping consumer demand. Over to the right, food hubs. These ventures provide a single location dedicated to processing, marketing, and distribution of regionally grown foods. And while some may only directly provide around 15 jobs on average, the largest among them contribute to job creation throughout the local food supply chain. So they're considered very foundational for your food system. And then on the lower left, the food business incubators. And these are really businesses that create other businesses, providing local learning infrastructure to decrease the failure rate of new businesses and can bring job training and business ownership opportunities to historically excluded populations. Last but not least, the farm-to-institution supporting businesses. There is definitely a tremendous demand from public institutions, schools, jails, hospitals for regional sourcing, but a growing need for intermediaries to manage relationships and logistics, and these businesses are bridging that gap. These are the major takeaways and lessons learned from the literature review. And I'll just briefly talk about the first bullet, the systems approach, which is really what we're trying to promote as an outcome of this whole study. And the idea is to target local investment dollars towards mutually beneficial segments of the food system. In other words, if a goal for your city is to increase access to healthy local food, you want to think about developing a local food procurement policy for city-run institutions. You would also think about investing in the associated aggregation and distribution infrastructure, stimulating supply sources and developing relationships with suppliers, as well as possibly developing a local brand with an associated marketing campaign. And these actions in combination will help ensure success. So these are all critical success factors, everything listed here, but some are certainly more important than others and depend on a city's vision for its food system and also what existing assets you may already have in your city. So turning it over to John Fisk with the Wallace Center.
Thank you, Diana, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody. Pleasure to be with you. Diana did a really nice overview of the findings there. What I'm going to do is go a little bit deeper into the individual innovations in the case studies that we looked at. Let me get control here. Oops, back up. So the key questions we looked at when we took the innovation of the case studies were, what are the most promising and existing ones, as well as those that are emerging in the local food sector development. And just as importantly is what's the data that's out there that illustrates and documents the impacts and the successes and the challenges that they're having, both in terms of local economic development, job creation, access to fresh, healthy, affordable food, and perhaps other impacts. We looked at a broad range of sources, including some interviews, the literature, and we looked at both direct and indirect economic impacts. Let's see. So we looked at a range of innovations, and Diana certainly pointed out the ones that we saw as maybe the most highly impactful, but I think here it's worth briefly going through all the various ones, because each city is going to have a different set of assets and a different geographic location in order to take advantage of different innovations. So which ones are the most important to them will certainly vary across area. So the first one we want to look at is food hubs. Food hubs, in their essence, are managing the aggregation and distribution of food from suppliers to buyer. Right? So what distinguishes them from a conventional distributor? One is its commitment to the farmers, its commitment to that local food supply, and its commitment to the local branding. Two is it provides a variety of services back down the chain to the farmers, such as health insurance, not health insurance, but such as insurance in terms of the products or in terms of the handling, bonding, things like that. It also provides trainings on food safety and things like that. And then on the other hand, it would work up the chain with buyers to help them understand local sourcing to make it really work for them. So they play that important pivot point with a commitment to the regional food system. Most successful business models, they certainly range from for-profit, nonprofit, cooperative, but also city-owned. But in terms of success of economic development, we found that the for-profits and the cooperatives are the most effective business model. It's a relatively new idea. Certainly building on conventional food system or conventional food system role of a distributor, but this idea of a commitment and working across the chain for a win-win relationship is a relatively new approach. As a result, many are 5 years old or younger, and as a result, many are relatively small at this point, although there are some large ones that stand out. Under $1 million is the average gross revenue in 2011. As Diana mentioned, on average about 15 jobs each. That includes some part-time jobs. More mature hubs, there's a couple of examples on the right-hand side of the slide that illustrate, with time and growth, some of them have over 100 jobs. Oftentimes it's important to know that as part of the growth strategy, many of them will start doing direct marketing early on and then move into wholesale or start doing both. Some will do just wholesale, but oftentimes that risk is managed by doing both direct marketing such as CSA type programs or box delivery programs. What can cities do skip? Yeah. What can cities do to facilitate these? Any kind of help with infrastructure that allows startup costs to be reduced, tax credits, economic development grants, we're seeing that across the country. Educating private lenders about these kind of facilities and the role they play, and maybe helping to offset some of the risk they may take in making a loan. Oops, I'm having a little delay here. Next, innovation, technology-based businesses. Oftentimes, it's the technology behind a lot of the businesses that you might see storefronts for. Right? So it's managing inventory, it's managing delivery, it's managing purchasing. We really see these kind of businesses that provide a back-end service all the way from the production to the consumer. They tend to be very flexible because they're free of a lot of bricks and mortar, right? It's also a very innovative field, again, emerging, 2 to 5 years old on average. They seem to receive, from what we've seen in the literature, on average $1 to $2 million in investments in order to get started. Range seem to be a bifurcation. You've got really small ones from 7 to 15 employees up to 50 to 70 when they expand. Sometimes when they get started in one city, they replicate in other cities, which I think accounts for the larger employee ranges that we see. But once they get started, replicating in other cities moves pretty quickly. Companies benefit, consumers benefit, ease of transaction, convenience, cost savings, things like that. Again, what can cities do? A lot of the investment, again, is private investment, but the flow of food really depends upon locations in cities. So oftentimes, these kind of businesses will be supported by the city, allowing them to use certain public spaces or properties for pickup, for handling, for delivery, and things like that. Oops, again, went too far. Next one I want to talk about is food incubators. I think we've all heard about business incubators, and so, but probably the saying should be that once you've seen one business incubator, you've seen one business incubator. I think they really vary across the spectrum, and they offer a whole variety of services. Centralized processing at times, job training, certification, business skills, commercial kitchen type things. So really a whole range of things. And we've seen a whole variety of sizes and different types across the country. One of the main functions they do is when we're doing startup of businesses, they serve to reduce the risk of these businesses. And the statistics are quite impressive in terms of the success of a business that's associated with an incubator and one that's versus one that's not. So they're very effective. They offer job training, and they can offer people to help move along the job ladder as well. Most operate with some type of social mission or economic mission, so they're oftentimes nonprofit, and they receive investments from both public and private players. What can cities do to support these? Cities can make investments. They can align public investment into them. They can allow, when the incubators are developing businesses in the food system in particular, they often run into many permitting issues. And so the city can be very effective in terms of helping to streamline those permitting needs. Food innovation clusters and zones oftentimes relieve startups of tax burdens, help them get started, help like businesses cluster together so they can be synergistic. Farmers markets. Diana mentioned a little bit about farmers markets, and I think we're all quite familiar with farmers markets. I think it's important to remember, though, that there's a whole variety of sizes, and there's generally two types. There's the direct type, where you're buying directly from the producer, and then there's a public or mixed-use type that tends to be much larger. It'll have that direct marketing in there, but it may also be selling, manufactured products, or be year-round, or have meats and a whole variety of fresh type things. So we see these often in some good examples like the Detroit's Eastern Market and the San Francisco Public Market. These, with farmers markets, there's been quite a bit of documentation, and the literature shows us that they're quite effective in job creation. They're quite effective in spurring ancillary businesses nearby. They bring tourism, all kinds of things like that. Again, markets require access to land and permissions. Many communities, the larger cities, I think, have figured out how to do this, especially with the public markets. But some other cities, I think, could be better at giving land access, facilitating access to water, electricity, internet perhaps, things like that to make these markets really hum along. Let's see if I can move this. There we go. Oops, moved too far. Farm to institution, this one probably stands out a bit in that it's really a market, an institutional market. What we're seeing is a rising demand among all kinds of institutions, whether it be schools, hospitals, nursing homes, private corporate cafeterias, or events looking for local food, oftentimes driven by the desire for a healthier food, or to contribute to economic development, or to create job creation in an area. So they frequently have this social goal, but also with economic benefits. As you can imagine, these markets are often large, and a lot of the local food movement supply is small, so a lot of the challenges have to do with finding quantity, quality, pricing, things like that. What we're seeing is, the rise of intermediaries in the middle that can help bring those products together and manage quality, quantity, and pricing, such as food hubs and other types of intermediaries. So what can cities do? Again, they can help things like food hubs and these intermediaries establish, help support any logistical needs, financing needs, and things like that. And again, procurement policy. The city itself may have cafeterias, may have facilities that purchase. Certainly school systems can change procurement policy that can drive the development of more local food systems, and especially healthy food systems. Mobile markets, I think, is a more, we've had mobile markets a long time, but we're seeing a lot of interest in these, and I think a lot of innovation and diversity. There seems to be two primary models around mobile markets. There's the independently owned, sole proprietor, direct-to-consumer type of market, right? On the other hand, there are larger, more established businesses like retail stores that may use, or even a public market that may use a mobile market to kind of extend their reach, especially reaching into underserved communities, increasing food access, or in probably more tourism situations to kind of extend the role there. Really growing in response to consumer trends, desire for convenience, and desire for greater food access. Again, I think some of the issues that they face are zoning and food safety. I think I saw a statistic that said 95% of cities allow fast food restaurants, but only 45, I think, allow food carts and mobile markets. And so there's some room to move there in terms of changing policy that allows these, still maintaining food safety, of course, but allowing these to be more extensive. Another idea that we saw coming out was some kind of streamlining of the permitting processes. So an entrepreneur that wants to do one of these may need to visit, 5, 6, 7 different offices. If the city can actually streamline that and make it much easier for these type of permitting processes, that would go a long way. Urban agriculture, again, a lot of diverse models. We often think of urban agriculture as smaller plots, not really a lot of revenue, and there is a lot of that out there. But on the other hand, we're seeing a lot of innovation, where you're seeing vertical farming, hydroponic, fairly large, multi-million-dollar invested hydroponic facilities that are selling fresh greens, tomatoes, peppers, and things like that. Hoop houses, even things like beekeeping. Again, access to land is important, and similar things around streamlining permits and the financing that we talked about earlier. And finally, let me talk about food recovery, which really, again, has a lot of different components. There's excess product that isn't harvested or that is harvested that's never really used that can go into donation situations, or there's excess product that can be used that we call seconds that may not be, they may be a little unblemished, they may be of the wrong size, that can go into processing. We're seeing a lot of different examples of redirecting streams of product that can be used for processing, that creates either job training opportunities or creates food for catering situations. And then I think the other the other piece we're finding is when it actually is waste, and we're talking about composting. There are some composting pilot projects across the country that are trying to sort this out. They're recovering from restaurants, from homes. They're bringing in other products to mix with the food waste. So just like in recycling, where we've seen extensive job development in the recycling world, it's fairly undeveloped in the area of composting, but we think there's a lot of promise there. Again, I think piloting things, scaling them up, seeing what works, looking at regulations, paying attention to food safety, and seeing what kind of investment and scale-up models that need to happen. There we go. And with that, let me turn it over to Cynthia Pansing, who's a principal partner at Changing Taste, to take us on to the next section.
Thank you, John. Excuse me, one little technical glitch right here before advancing the slides. There we go. There was a time delay. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really delighted to be sharing the findings of our work together with you, and we look forward to a really productive question and answer session at the end. I want to thank John and Diana for doing such a wonderful job setting up my portion of the presentation today. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give kind of a bird's eye view of the macroeconomic analysis that we did to provide a kind of supplement to the case study innovation research that the Wallace Center team conducted. And the purpose of this macro level research was to get a better sense of the economic growth potential of the food sector, as well as to dive in more deeply into some national level local economic impact studies to get a better sense of the potential economic growth opportunities in food sector investments. And what I'd like to do is to start off by giving the kind of macro level bird's eye view of the food sector's economic potential, then move into a discussion of some of these local economic studies that we ran across, and to provide a kind of a bare bones findings from those studies. And then what I'm going to try to do is to weave together the work that we've done to lay the foundation for a guidance document for cities that Diana will talk about in the next section of this presentation. So to recap a little bit of what Diana touched upon earlier, the food sector is really one of the largest sectors of the economy, and even in the recent economic downturn continued to expand mightily. To give you a sense of proportion about the high growth of the food sector, there are two primary findings that we identified through this exhaustive literature search. And one is that food sector economic activity was approximately $1.2 trillion in 2011, or 8.3% of the total GDP. Food services alone accounted for 30%, a third of U.S. jobs created in the U.S., and this was from an August 2012 report. Interestingly, however, 91%, so the vast majority of food businesses have fewer than 50 employees. So they're by and large small businesses. The food sector is also, like other sectors of the economy, subject to some level of risk, and this level of risk is something that's very important for us to take into account in making any suggestions or offering any guidance about where to invest, what array of options to invest in the food sector, and as a risk management is a key role that cities can play. So in terms of the risk, there are 2 points that are really interesting illustrations of that dimension of the food sector. One is 3% of new food products launched in grocery retail remain in the market 1 year after launch. 60% of food-related businesses fail within 1 year of launch. 90% fail within 5 years. In summary, the key facts that we pulled together in this literature review from a bird's eye perspective, the macroeconomic perspective, is the food sector is a high job creation industry. It can yield high returns in terms of economic development, other community benefits, but many jobs are low paying, less than $10 an hour, and there are uneven working conditions associated. There's also a high failure rate in new businesses. A key challenge for public sector investors for local cities is how to minimize risk and sustain economic development benefits over time. And again, this is a very critical role for cities to play in their kind of managing externalities role as public jurisdictions and protectors of the public good. Oops. Now I'd like to move on to a series of slides that reveal what we found out about the local economic impacts of food investments, local food investment studies from around the country on the multiplier benefit. Specifically, what is the impact of an investment to the local economy? What's the ripple effect in terms of local dollars generated and local jobs, too, as a result of an investment in the food sector? And what this first slide shows is over after researching roughly 20 to 25 studies of multipliers, we identified a range between 1.3 or $1.30 and $4 of benefit per dollar of investment. Now, there are a number of cautions with this data. It's highly uneven. Sample sizes are across the map. And the information is not really useful for forecasting. However, it is useful as a one-point-in-time snapshot that gives a sense of relative proportionate impact by food sector investment. We also looked at about 10 studies on the jobs multiplier effects of local food investments. And what we found is that for every job created in a new food enterprise, the low range of benefit was 1.2 jobs created, and the high range of benefit, 6 jobs created. Interestingly enough, with that latter figure, the primary source of that information was a huge national study about cooperatives and cooperative financing mechanisms to support food businesses from the production side on through the supply chain yield a fairly high job creation benefit. Again, the data is uneven, the sample sizes cover a wide gamut, and this information is primarily useful for giving a snapshot, one-point-in-time snapshot, and a sense of relative proportion of benefit by segment of the supply chain. This next slide shows benefits along the supply chain. And this diagram is reproduced in our roadmap document, but this gives a range of multipliers in terms of local economic benefits, shown in blue, by supply chain segment, as well as the local job creation benefits, shown in green, by supply chain segment. And I won't go through these in detail. Again, this you can find in our roadmap, but this is to give you just a general sense of relative proportion and our attempt to essentially tie multipliers to certain supply chain segments. Now, the key findings from the literature review, Diana touched upon a little bit earlier. I think that really what I would like to recap here are some of the sources of the studies for this information. As Diana said a little bit earlier, there's really a huge increase in sustained demand for local food, as identified through a National Restaurant Association study, various consumer surveys and studies. This is one of the high growth areas. It's also a high growth area in terms of opportunities that corporations are seeking to build on success through takeover. And so there are a number of corporations, CEOs were interviewed to essentially say that this is one of their high priorities too, is to identify where there are promising opportunities and to seize upon them and fold them into the corporate fold. As Diana also said, that there is uneven quality in wages for new food sector jobs. And just to talk a little bit more about the supply chain, differences in terms of the supply chain impacts and local job benefits as well as local multiplier effects. Production and processing, again, yield the highest local multiplier effects with highest wages, while the retail and food service sector has high multiplier effects but relatively low and uneven wages. And these findings were really provided a kind of cornerstone for developing our road document. The role of cities is critical to success. And while I won't go into every single bullet point on this page, Diana covered this quite well a little bit earlier. Cities are, what I will say here is that cities are in a unique position to be really effective agents of change in the food sector, and making this tie between food system investment and local economic benefits. And there's much more research to be done in this arena. Now, the last slide that I would like to present here helps tie together, essentially recaps this framework that Diana spoke about a little bit earlier, and how we were weaving together components of this research to identify some cornerstone areas for guidance to cities about how to invest in the local food sector economy in the future. And these building blocks, an asset and gap inventory, the policy tools and strategies, and a variety of different metrics for evaluation are essentially cornerstones of the roadmap for food system innovation and investment that Diana will talk about in just a moment.
Thanks, Cynthia. So the roadmap is intended to guide you through the development of investment strategies that increase the number of new innovations and business ventures in your local food system, and also help improve the odds of their survival and success. And so our recommendations are really designed to help make the local economic case to maximize sustainable return on investment and to manage risk. And the components listed here provide the building blocks for the roadmap and all of the tools that we're providing. And this figure really provides a broad overview of the model planning process that we present in the roadmap for food sector investments. And I'm going to go into the first couple steps in a little bit more detail, and then Cynthia from Changing Tastes will walk you through the rest of the steps. Definitely, we want to let you know that we find that visioning is the first step in the process, and it really means that you begin with the end in mind. And it's a really critical step. It takes some time and effort, but by developing a vision for your city's food system, you can start with a clear picture of what you want your system to look like and what you want it to do for you. And the reason why I personally think it's very critical is that it helps you focus your efforts so that you don't get sidetracked later on in the process. Since, as we've talked about in this presentation, and we talk about it in the roadmap quite extensively, there are inherent trade-offs in choosing investment strategies, and of course there's budget limitations. So we don't have all the time and money in the world, and we need to really target the most appropriate leverage points. And we actually spent some time visioning in the beginning of this project, and it really helped keep us on target. We decided early on, with the help of the steering committee, that we wanted a process to help stimulate food innovations that have multiple local economic benefits, such as livable wage jobs, and we also wanted to increase access to healthy foods. So these goals led us to really try to understand how the food system assets link together so that we could find our leverage points that would bring us the highest economic return to achieve our goals. And this, before beginning to conduct your asset assessment and mapping exercise, this slide really shows what kind of assets you have in your food system and exactly how those food system assets function as the foundation for an investment strategy. Here we look at assets as forms of human, socio-political, financial, physical, and natural, or I guess environmental capital that are essential and interactive building blocks for an investment strategy. And then if you think about assets as key to an innovation success or failure, they tend to fall into categories that make up the bullets on this slide. So there are different types of assets that in combination can lead to successful implementation of a city's investment strategy. So asset mapping is the second major step in the roadmap after visioning that will help you determine which of your assets are foundational, mutually beneficial, and key to successful project level investment. And once you have a good understanding of the assets that you have, you can determine where new investments are needed. And so later in the process, as you're assessing investment options, this inventory is going to provide you with the foundation and the framework for knitting together and then building upon existing assets so that you are positioned and that they are positioned to add multiple forms of value and really root future investments most efficiently. And one example of a key foundational asset, as John provided, is the food business incubator, but just bringing that back into the forefront. That innovation draws upon and connects multiple types of assets to assist beginning entrepreneurs and grow businesses. Incubators connect organizations and businesses into their network while also serving as a center for economic activity, and they can spur new businesses within the community. And so this slide shows different forms of capital as food system assets and the types of tools and innovations that can be used to fulfill a particular need. It's really a framework, again, to help you make sense of your existing food landscape from a broad yet very intentional perspective. And now back to Cynthia.
Okay. Thank you, Diana. What I'd like to do is to scroll backwards a little bit to slide 41, the action plan framework. As Diana mentioned, she covered the first two components of this planning framework, and I'm going to cover the next three, but with particular emphasis on assessing options and the planning and implementation phase of this framework. Fundamental to all the remaining phases of this roadmap, all the remaining stages and steps of this roadmap, is this asset framework. And the asset building framework we used as a base for tying policy tools and strategies and to identifying where there might be ways to assess options among a variety of projects that would help build particular assets in the strongest way possible, and also some metrics for evaluating cities' outcomes and successes in those respects. This slide right here, the asset framework and function, shows essentially how we have connected this asset building framework to the tools and strategies that we've identified from entrepreneurial support geared towards building a human capital component, to public investment, stimulating private investment, to building the financial component, to land assembly as an example of building the natural component, the natural capital component. This next slide, and again, these diagrams, these tables are in the roadmap document themselves. This one shows a finer grain level of information about how these tools and strategies tie to the asset capital framework, and what are some specific examples of particular tools and strategies that cities could use to build and strengthen the food sector and harness the greatest economic development benefits from those investments, as well as the ways for building other components of capital that are enormously important, including the social capital dimension. This middle column here has a number of colored boxes, and the colored boxes essentially key into specific goals that cities might want to pursue in making investments in the food sector. And so we've also linked particular types of goals, for example, in increasing jobs, number of jobs, enhancing wages, enhancing access to healthy foods among disadvantaged communities, and we've essentially tried to tie those particular goals to these particular strategies, and that will become clear when you look at the roadmap document. Here's another take on the framing for the tools and the strategies that we use, essentially showing in rough form what kinds of strategies might work best given a particular supply chain in segment investment, where there might be some overlap and where not. Now, one of the aspects to this roadmap that we believe is unique is that we have attempted to come up with a couple of tools that we hope will be of help to cities in helping identify where their priorities for investment given respective goals and how to mitigate or minimize the risk associated with those investments. These two tools are called the Investment Evaluation Tool and also the Risk Management Tool. They are linked through Excel spreadsheets. They are also available on our websites as downloadable documents. And essentially, they both reinforce one another in terms of helping enable cities to tie specific goals to particular investments, weigh those investments within the context of their goals and economic priorities, economic development priorities, and then to hone in on specific investments that may meet those goals in the best manner possible. So essentially the investment evaluation tool, to start off, would enable cities to compare multiple project proposals and identify top investment opportunities, as well as aggregate multiple projects to compare to single larger investments in other sectors. It helps estimate the return on investment in terms of overall local economic activity, number of jobs, and overall wages. And it uses a balanced scorecard approach that we have developed for the purpose of this project to provide a customized investment rating for a proposal based on each city's specific priorities. Now, I think that the best way to illustrate how this evaluation tool works is to talk about an imaginary example. We should give credit here to Green City Grocers, from whom we took the top photo on this slide. And for those of you who might recognize, the bottom photo is taken from the Charlie Chaplin film City Lights. So City Lights, the imaginary example, is a startup company that puts greenhouses on top of warehouses to grow vegetables. It needs $2 million in startup funding. The city would also need to create a new zoning category to allow for this use, a highly variable zoning category. Within 3 years, it expects to generate $3 million in sales, $850,000 in payroll, and employ 30 people in 2 operations with average wages of $14 an hour. And there are no assumptions made about labor conditions, but that would be an important component as well. The management team has some successes in its arsenal, now works for a large grocer, and has good experience. So how would we evaluate this project, whether it's worthwhile to invest in any manner, either through direct funding or through streamlined permitting and processing, or through some other means or within the bailiwick of cities? First of all, in this evaluation tool, and in fact in evaluating any project, we would want to address the following questions. What's the return on public investment? How many jobs would be created? How good would they be, and at what cost? Food access. Will this increase access to healthy and sustainable food? Local food system. Does the venture play a key role in helping forge some level of change in the local food system? And the 2 fundamental questions that cities would be interested in are, on balance, does this investment make sense for the city? And regarding the risk, what are the odds that this particular project will go as planned? So the investment evaluation tool attempts to answer this first question, and the risk management tool attempts to answer the second question. So again, this worksheet is available on our websites as a downloadable document, but I would like to walk you through it very quickly and hopefully as clearly as possible to tell you how this works. So the first 2 boxes here essentially would enable cities to input information about a particular investment on the basis of a project proposal, a business person's business plan, on the basis of some other kind of perspective. There would be financial information taken from one of those sources and input into this top orange box. Business financial information, business ownership information, business function information based on NAICS codes, and business activity information. The next set of inputs is the investment request information, the blue box, where cities would input the value of the investment or loan, other costs that might be associated, And then goal and asset information. Does the business provide, for example, a function that is a city priority and provides a new service? And there are other kinds of goals and assets that are listed here, and there will be yes/no responses accordingly. This input information feeds into some formulas that follow later in this spreadsheet that will enable this kind of balanced scorecard assessment of the investment potential of this particular project. Before doing so, though, there is a place for cities to enter, in the green box, or light green box, information about their specific economic development goals. Target threshold wage. In this particular instance, we've used as a placeholder 200% of poverty level for a family of one. Cities may choose to enter a very different threshold wage criterion here. Minimum gross revenue, and so on. The information that's input into this document that would then also, and the balanced scorecard off to the right, cities could adjust their priorities by essentially assigning percentages to which goal means the most to them. For example, local economic activity ratio. In this spreadsheet, that is assigned as a percentage of 60. Payroll ratio, 20. It all needs to add up to 100%, but this is a way of essentially keeping track and prioritizing among priorities for a city in terms of economic development impacts, and also whether this investment is worthwhile. The bottom two boxes here, the pink and the purple, are considered output boxes, and this is where the embedded formulas lie that take into account the input information, project financial information, cities' goals, assumptions about threshold wages, etc. And that is all calculated, entered into this formula to calculate the return on investment in the pink box. And then at the bottom of this spreadsheet, this worksheet, is a project evaluation, a balanced scorecard approach that would help a city figure out whether or not this investment is worthwhile. In terms of the local economic activity ratio, the payroll ratio, job and wage creation poverty ratio, which could be customized according to city. Now what I'd like to do is move on next to the risk management tool. As I mentioned, the risk management tool ties back into this investment evaluation tool, building upon the input information, building upon the city's goals, building upon the balanced scorecard. What the risk management tool enables cities to do is to evaluate proposals based on their likelihood of success. It assesses overall expected return from multiple small projects based on specific odds of some but not all underperforming. And it helps a city assemble a set of projects that are more likely to meet a city's goal for local economic development and strengthening the local food system as well as its tolerance for risk. So let's see how this might work with the City Lights project that we're using as our imaginary example. Now, there are really minimal inputs to this risk management tool because, as I mentioned, it draws from all the financial information, all the city goal information, priority setting that was established in the evaluation, investment evaluation tool. What this risk management tool does is, in the orange box, it essentially draws upon the best available current information about loan failure rates, essentially the business age adjusted risk of failure that is then applied to the outputs of the previous table and tied to, in the particular case of the loan repayment failure rate, it's a link to the loan repayment failure rate lookup table by the NAICS code category. Now, there is a limit to this data, to be frank, and one of the limits is that some of the innovations that we have seen that seem to be most promising and most interesting to invest in are cross-cut a number of different NAICS code categories. I see that our presentation has gone off the screen, but I'll continue talking. So this lookup table is established on the basis of the federal NAICS code categories, but is limited as a result because some of these projects cross-cut multiple categories. We were hoping that through the case study data collection process as part of this project that we could help build our own reference table. But there is more research needed, a fundamental role that cities can play in the future in help building this research base around what are project successes that will help enable us together to build these reference tables. In the meantime, the NAICS code table is probably the best source of this information. In the next box, the pink box, taking into account all the preceding information, the formulas, the priorities, etc., this box provides an estimate of the risk-adjusted return on investment analysis. The purple box, and this would be very useful in developing a portfolio of several projects in order to figure out the return on investments. The purple box, again, backs off of all the inputs previously. It takes the project evaluation balanced scorecard and adjusts for risk. So it essentially modifies the balanced scorecard based upon the risk. Riskier businesses would get a much lower score. And the bottom essentially provides cities with a better estimate, taking into account the risk of what would be the return on investment of this particular project and whether it is a worthwhile investment overall. So again, these two tools are meant to be used in tandem with one another to help cities sort among an array of investment opportunities, and also within that array of investment opportunities, which one or which ones might be appropriate to invest in separately or as a cluster, and what would be the expected return. So I think that I will close in saying that these are works in progress. These tools that we've developed are as evidence-based as they can be at this stage. There is more room for research in a whole variety of arenas that we've identified, and we would really, really welcome any comments that you have in terms of the utility of these tools, as well as any feedback that you have in our documents in the future. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn over the virtual podium back to John.
I've got it. I'm back at the virtual podium. Thank you, Cynthia, Diana, and Gail, for all that great information. I think, as everyone can notice, there's a lot in these in the Lit Review as well as the roadmap that we invite you to access. We could only touch on it lightly here today. But let's jump into questions, and there are a series of questions that have come in. It'll be kind of potluck. I may assign to individuals, but anyone of our team here is welcome to join in. And we're also going to be joined by Arlen Wasserman, who's also part of Changing Tastes team, to help us respond to some questions. So first one, the questioner says, do we have a sense of the magnitude of public support for these projects? And this question came in when we were going through some of the case studies. So for example, how much city, state, and federal money is required to support incubators, it asks, or food hubs? Anyone want to take a quick shot at that? I've got a few things to say on that too, but I thought I'd ask.
I'm not seeing questions here.
Why don't you go ahead, John?
Yeah, so why don't I go ahead? So in our work, we found on the whole, the Economic Development Administration puts in about $80 million a year into incubators across the country. Now, these are definitely not all food incubators. There are a whole variety of business incubators. But there is federal money out there, and it seems to be a continuous stream. Some of the incubators that we looked at, for example, there's one in San Francisco that it operates on about $700,000 a year, but the businesses that it helps and sponsors and nurses along are making $4 million in gross revenue. Right, so the return on investment for them is quite good. It's a fairly small incubator in comparison, but it's quite effective and it's very focused on food systems. Food hubs, from our work in food hubs, they really do range, but to get one started, $1 to $3 million would be a good start. Most of that is oftentimes in if they need to buy a building, but if they choose to rent trucks, choose to rent buildings, it's a much cheaper startup. But eventually they're going to need to invest in some kind of infrastructure. I think when it comes to urban agriculture and you're looking at a commercial enterprise there, a couple of our examples were in the multi-million-dollar range, say up to $20 million, because oftentimes they're actually creating a new facility, right, a new greenhouse or growing space and investing in equipment, so there's a lot of upfront costs there. Whereas on the other hand, if perhaps it's a more low-tech, it's a soil-based item, it's not a lot of facilities, it can be quite quite cost-effective that way. So my point being, it certainly ranges, and it kind of depends on what scale you're looking at. Anybody else want to add to that one? Okay. A broader question, I think, could be some good discussion. How can economic development agencies, in particular, help develop healthy local and regional food systems? How can bonding be used? So anyone got experience with these?
Well, this is Diana Sokolov. I can talk about the economic development agencies. In San Francisco, the Mayor's Office of Economic and Workforce Development teams up with an organization, a nonprofit organization called SF Made, and provides funding to this organization to do, which is mostly an incubator organization. It provides funding for them to conduct workshops for various manufacturers, including food manufacturers, although food manufacturers represents a large share of their clients and customers. It provides tech space, so places where people can actually figure out how to make their product and get their business going. Again, it's a business incubator, and so it provides job training opportunities. It helps folks figure out how to know when you should be hiring new people, when you should bring folks on full-time versus part-time, how to get more funding. It helps folks figure out how to get access to capital, startup capital, and also staffing funding. And it's created a local brand for local food manufacturers in San Francisco. And so if you're a member of the organization, you can include this brand at your store or your mobile cart or on your food package. And so that is one way that economic development agencies can really inject a strategic plan to get folks started on getting their business growing and going.
Excellent. Others want to speak to that? Okay. So interesting question on multiplier effects. So the question is, when we talk about local multiplier effect, does it just mean that jobs, say from distant locations, are being relocated to a more local business? So for example, by localizing in Colorado, are we just taking jobs from Florida, for example? Are there really more jobs created, or just a redistribution of jobs? Arlen, Cynthia, can you guys speak to that one?
Arlen, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, the very short answer is yes. The move to process foods in a city or in an urban region means moving those processing jobs from somewhere else. And most of the benefits that come are about growing jobs in or near the city, independent of what it may mean to another location, as well as the other benefits of having more local foods and more businesses that can interact with each other. The ability to have multiple types of food businesses in a community is what causes the innovation and additional growth in the economy. The rest is a classic import substitution or moving jobs from one place to another.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is if it depends on the type of innovation too. If there is an innovation that's newly created within a city that is focused on a particular type of business unique to that geographic area that didn't exist previously, then I don't think we can make the import substitution argument or displacement argument about jobs. So I think it's just highly variable depending on the scale and type of innovation investment.
Cynthia makes a great point to say that opening another winery near Diana, Northern California, displaces winemaking jobs from India or Iowa is not true because of the unique nature of high-quality products produced in Northern California.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you for that. Next question has to do with going back to some of the worksheets that we covered towards the end, Cynthia. Are there any suggested ranges to the approve/decline of a project given the portfolio score percentages?
I'll take a crack at that and then let Arlen also answer that question. It's a really good question, but if it's highly dependent upon, the answer is highly dependent upon the goals that a city establishes and what are its threshold for investing or not investing. And there might also need to be, cities might need to be given the allowance for making decisions about a particular project based on some other criteria beyond what are in the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is a guidance tool. It's a tool to help assess relative merit. It's a tool to help assess investment potential, but there may be some overweening dimensions to a particular project that a city needs to take into account as worth the risk or worth, essentially transcending whatever concerns or weaknesses might come through in the evaluation or risk management spreadsheets. That said, I think it's really what is we hope will be useful to cities is the extent to which both of these worksheets are customizable and really are highly dependent upon city goals, city threshold criteria established, and as well as some intangibles. And the intangibles are going to have to be considered as a supplement to these calculator worksheets. Arlen, would you like to continue with that?
So the worksheets, when you download them, appear as Cynthia showed them during the PowerPoint. And we have made a decision to, rather than make them locked and elegant visually, to make them open so that each equation and set of data is visible so that you can adapt it to your circumstance. When you download the worksheet and read carefully, you'll see that we also put in some thresholds. Here we ask questions like, how many jobs must a project generate and at what wage level to be of interest to a city? And also, if you care to, how much of the relevant city's food market does the new venture serve, if that's relevant? For instance, if you're going to do something that supplies school food, you want to supply 5% of school fruits and vegetables. Or if you're going to create a new business, do you want to put your energy into rewriting zoning laws and making an investment if at the end only 2 jobs are created, no matter how high paying they are? When you enter data about a project, you get a flag or a warning that something is below a level of concern or too small to consider, frankly. That's the criteria we would use. Other than that, the scores are simply meant to rate projects in relationship to one another and to show the risk or the odds of something not good happening with each project. So when you go to invest in a large number of projects, you can figure out your overall likely return. There's no minimum threshold for scores, but each city might set the minimum threshold for jobs, for wage rate, or for impact on the food system.
All right, very good. Thank you for that in-depth response, both of you. Kind of pulling it back up a bit, maybe to the 10,000-foot level. Question comes in, how do individuals and organizations interested in these issues get a city to consider developing a roadmap when it's really not on the city's radar right now? This might be a good question for Gail and Diana. How do people communicate with the city effectively and move this up on the priority?
This is Gail. That is a great question. I think one of the first things to do is to check in and see if you've got a food council in your city or region and work through them. I think you probably need to find some other champions in the community and approach the city in a fashion that is very clear and credible. But they're going to, it usually comes down to resources for a city, so trying to have some options out there in terms of funders or university students or willingness to volunteer to help with it is always very, very helpful. Diana?
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's exactly what I was going to say. I mean, food councils are really the best way to get that information to decision makers. And if you don't have a food council in your city, then you might think about starting one. Food councils are highlighted in the roadmap as one of the greatest tools to really see all of these investments come to fruition. In San Francisco, we have a food security task force, and the public is welcome to attend. And so if you have some thoughts on how your city should and could invest in the food system, the types of businesses you want to see created, you could bring that information to your council. Other ways are just to talk to your city leaders, your supervisors, city council leaders, et cetera. We also have other strong business leaders in San Francisco who you could talk to who are really involved in the food system, who certainly have the ear of decision makers. So there's definitely lots of ways. You could call your local planning department. That's another avenue.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Kind of staying maybe with the city theme and the larger, when we looked at a lot of this work, a lot of the urban food systems work depends upon supply, which means there's a rural-urban connection, right? And we also know that there's a large number of farms in the peri-urban area or in the immediate rural area around cities are selling into the city in a variety of ways and account for a lot of this regional food systems activity. One of the questions that's come in is around preserving ag land and farmland in those areas. Mm-hmm. So any experience with that based on the work we did here? Can anyone speak to some strategies that we might be seeing across the country or ways that cities are being able to preserve some of that ag land?
When we conducted the literature review, which was the partner document to the roadmap, we came across several studies that reinforced, John, actually, that the question of what can cities and is really a statement that what is happening in cities is what is preserving small farms. Cynthia may be able to provide a little bit more detail here, but the main takeaways from looking at other studies about the intersection of investing in local food systems and agriculture is that the main reason that most small farms that are still viable in the U.S. are located around cities that have two things going on. One is a food service or a culinary community with a focus on farm-to-table or local sourcing, and the other is institutional purchasing policies that also mandate local sourcing. And that those two things together are the main drivers of small farms still existing in a viable way.
Mm-hmm. What I will add to that is that in our literature review and the roadmap, we focused more on strategies that cities could undertake within their boundaries. Certainly strategies as well in terms of investing in the food sector that would help support local farms adjacent to the urban boundaries. Within the urban boundaries themselves, what was revealed to us through this literature review is the role that cities are playing in terms of the unique role that they're playing in land assembly, in essentially assembling land that a city owns, in some instances to use for urban agriculture, for the development of urban farms. In some instances, in the case of the city of Detroit, for example, they're trying to essentially create a web of urban farms and urban ags that connect to the eastern market, at least based upon the Detroit systemic vision plan that came out in the last 9 months or so. And so the land assembly role is a very important one, as well as various zoning strategies to help support smaller scale urban agriculture. But in terms of urban farms themselves, probably one of the greatest roles the city could play is in terms of assembling land for that purpose and zoning in a way to protect it for that purpose in the longer term, as well as systemically tie that to other assets within a city boundary that will help build value in all respects while essentially keeping the land protected and inexpensive enough for food production.
Yeah, and this is Diana from San Francisco. I can also add that definitely one of the main drivers of the innovations that we looked at through this project was food access. And we're looking at really bridging the gap between farming and urban consumers. And so a lot of the businesses that we are recommending are good investments do that, the farm-to-institution programs, farmers markets, that kind of thing. And we have, in California, specifically, we have two pieces of legislation. One is being reviewed right now, one has already passed. And the one that has already passed is our cottage food law. And so that can allow small-scale food producers to sort of try out their business and allow products to be produced in your home at a small-scale way, so that you can start to grow your business and you can work with other local businesses to make that happen. And that is a way that you can work with local farmers to get your products and that kind of thing. So trying to develop those kinds of relationships. And also we're looking at AB 551 is a piece of legislation that the California legislature is looking at. And it's a model similar to the Mills Act, which provides reduced property taxes for historic preservation. This would provide reduced property taxes for urban agriculture. And so some of the reasons why we're looking at that is to really spur urban agriculture and really help folks get into that world and that business. And again, trying to increase food access in an urban setting, but it also could be used for cities as well as for counties could initiate these kinds of programs.
That's great. Gail, did you want to add something in there?
Nope, I think you guys have done a great job.
Yeah, very good response on that one. Great. Next question is about financing, and then who's stepping up to the plate to finance some of these enterprises that might end up being partners for the city. So it's around what's the role of community development finance institutions, or the CDFIs that we see across the country, or other mission-driven financial intermediaries, including venture and angel funding networks. Let me take a quick shot at that and see if others want to add in. I mean, we're seeing an immense amount of interest in food sector innovations and enterprises. I mean, there's a national program, the Healthy Food Financing Initiative, that puts out federal money to the CDFIs across the country who are interested, who get to reloan that into retail stores and then also into the supply chain. Not everybody knows that, but it doesn't all need to go to retail. It can go, I think it's either 10 or 20% of the funds can actually go to things like food hubs and processing facilities and others. There's a growing interest among social-driven organizations like RSF Social Finance and Slow Money and various others. I mean, there's just, I actually get calls monthly or weekly from different organizations that are interested in the sector. And it's a range, you know, they're interested in social-driven investments, but oftentimes they lean more towards, you know, we want a return on this, it's more of a commercial return, or they lean the other way and say, you know, we're really just interested in the outcome, yes, we want our money back. But, and then on the other hand, there's foundations that are, they certainly make grants, but many of them are looking at what they call PRIs, or program-related investments, that again are technically to be returned and are a loan. So there really are, and even I'll say even Farm Credit is looking hard at how they can work back down the supply chain to invest in regional food systems, and in certain parts of the country are doing a very good job.
This is Cynthia. I'd like to add to that. We're also seeing some hotbeds of venture capitalists who are in the Bay Area and elsewhere across the country who are developing virtual syndicates around supporting the food sector in terms of more creative social media related ventures. We're also seeing online small grants making organizations or seed funding organizations, Kiva and others that are partnering with various regional community-based financing initiatives around the country and the South, elsewhere to support food sector investments. So there is a section in the literature review, by the way, that identifies a number of those private sector venture capitalists, syndicates, individual investors who are investing in the food sector in a much stronger way than in the past, and in particular around the kind of the social media IT component of the food sector. So, for example, around essentially creating a virtual farmers market, connecting farmers to consumers, and other sorts of related projects.
This is Darla, the last piece I'll add is what was not mentioned, which is that many small businesses get their investment through loans from traditional banks. And in looking at the circumstances, what we found is that there is a very simple obstacle that prevents traditional banks and their loan officers from lending to small food businesses, and that is a lack of understanding of the food industry and the risks associated, and believing things that may not be true, like food businesses don't grow, or food businesses always fail, or the restaurant where I go to lunch doesn't look very profitable, therefore I'm not thinking of investing in any food companies. And it's simple outreach activities from a city to their local banking community can be a way to open up lots of very traditional investment for small businesses.
Great, thank you. Thank you. We probably have time for one, maybe two more questions. One says, it seems that the technical and the business skills support needs is often an underestimated area. Do you have examples of cities or organizations who successfully focus on this area? So technical/business skills support needs. I think we saw some of this, of course, in the incubator section of the study. Mm-hmm. I think one that stands out is the Rutgers Food Innovation Center. I think that's the official title, which is in our programming, that does a whole range of job training, skills building, and a variety of things, and has been quite successful. Others want to think about cities or other organizations that successfully focus here.
I can just speak to San Francisco. This is Diana. We have two pretty strong business incubator programs. Aside from the city's Office of Small Business, we have, as I mentioned earlier, SF Made, which is financially supported by the city, which is a business training program. They do workshops, they do job training, business expansion, information on capital investment, how to brand your product, that kind of thing. We also have logosThe, which is a wildly successful business incubator that works with mostly minority and low-income women, and so historically excluded populations, and helping them develop a business plan for their product, their homemade product, and helping them with kitchen space, and also helping them get their product to market.
And this is Gail in Minneapolis. We have economic development centers, and one that we're working closely with is Latino Economic Development Center. I think just providing that hands-on technical assistance and support for entrepreneurs. And I think, it's important to remember that a lot of the statistics that we showed earlier today, that applies to all small businesses. And yeah, I think that understanding of how you write up a good business plan is something that most types of businesses need, and there typically are resources in your major urban areas to help with that stuff, often at no cost. There's even nonprofit groups like SCORE, which are retired executives that love to help other small businesses get up and running.
Great, thank you. So let's take one more. There's a whole range of questions, but and this one has to do with food access and food security. We've talked a lot about jobs. We've talked a lot about economic impact. But if you do access the report, you'll find that there's also quite a bit around food access and how these enterprises and how the city can play a role in that as well. I'm trying to. Sorry about that. I was looking for the exact wording of the question and all this. It seems to have jumped around. But, you know, I think if all of us can speak a little bit to how the work that we see here actually contributes to food access and have we documented any results? I think that was what the question was. And I'll speak for myself is that certainly the institutional markets, the farm to school piece, where it's running well, has had a major impact on access to product, and they've even documented increased consumption, right, which is a much harder thing. Are the kids actually eating the product? Now, does it have an impact on their health? Well, that becomes a much harder thing to document, but people are looking at that. It's important to keep in mind that many kids, sometimes the only good meal they'll get is at school, and certainly one of the strongest meals can be there for many kids. So maybe I'll stop there and see if others want to add anything around food access, food security, and health outcomes of regional food systems in their areas.
This is Gail again in Minneapolis. You know, I mean, the food movement in Minneapolis and the work that the city's doing started in our health department because they saw the need to do that, and they were getting into healthy corner stores. They were getting into economic development models almost from the get-go because they understood the link. In terms of documentation, I'd have to do some digging, and maybe there's something in the lit review to really come up with all of that. But you know, healthy lives doesn't happen overnight, and I think that's part of the problem in terms of documentation. Mm-hmm. And I'll leave it at that.
Right. Yeah. Does anyone else want to respond to it? If not, we'll head into home plate here. All right. Yeah, go ahead quickly. That'd be good. Mm-hmm.
So I'll just say quickly, we're doing a lot of work in San Francisco on food access, but we did just recently pass a Healthy Corner Store initiative that's being led by our Office of Economic and Workforce Development, and it gets to the job creation, it gets to access, it gets to health impacts, it gets to trying to create opportunities for business owners to connect with rural communities and with local farmers. So it's definitely one of those foundational pieces of legislation that can really hit on a lot of these leverage points.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you all. Thanks everybody on the phone for the great questions, and thank the panel for the responses. Let me turn it back over to Jeff to wrap us up.
Sure. Here are your URLs for downloading the food sector scan. Let me just note that that middle one, ngfn.org/cityfoodsector, will also include a link to the recording of this webinar as well as the slides. So feel free to write down the email addresses here to contact us, and thank you very much.